He sat there for some time before anyone noticed him. Then the sergeant sent an officer over. The man had dropped asleep by that time, and the officer shook him. "What's wrong, old-timer?" he asked not ungently. "Snap out of it." The man blinked at him through his spectacles. "I don't know," he said, in a rather cultivated but halting voice. "I can't seem to remember my name, or who I am." And he added, with an apologetic smile, "Memory is like a purse, officer. If it be over full, all will drop out of it." The officer eyed him, and then went back to the desk. "Old boy's lost his memory, or so he says. Better put him somewhere for the night, eh?" The sergeant agreed, and this story might have had a different ending but for that very decision. For it was when a jailer was taking him back to a cell that he noticed some stains on the man's white shirt. He stopped in the long stone-paved passage and looked at it. "Ain't hurt anywhere, are you?" "No, I don't think so." The jailer was mildly curious. In the cell he got his prisoner to take off his coat, and was shocked to find that the turned-up cuffs of the shirt were also badly stained. The unknown eyed them himself through his spectacles. "That's strange," he said haltingly. "Now how did I get that?" "You're asking me," said the policeman. "What you been doing? Killing a pig?" The man shook his head, and then slowly drew something out of a trouser's pocket and gravely handed it to the officer. "This doesn't belong to me," he said in his halting voice. "I have no idea how I got it." The policeman took it and held it up. Then he grinned. "Looks like you've been playing Santa Claus," he said, and still grinning carried the object out to the sergeant at the desk. It was a short grayish beard of the cheapest variety, and made to hook over the ears by small wires. When the sergeant, curious himself by then, went back to the cell, it was to find the unknown quietly asleep on his hard bed. The two men inspected the stains on him, but he did not rouse. And he was still asleep when Mr. Sullivan got there an hour later. Sullivan examined him before he roused him. He was neatly dressed, but it was evidently 2 days or more since he had shaved. His clothing too was incredibly dusty, and his shoes worn and scratched as with long walking over rough ground. Sullivan, with his usual memory for faces, had known him at once for Daniels. He himself was tired and rather sick, for he had come from examining the contents of that ghastly trunk, and his next step is excusable under the circumstances. He turned to the sergeant and pointed to the stains on the shirt. "There's the Crescent Place killer," he said. "And he's shamming. I'll give you 15 minutes to bring his memory back while I get in touch with headquarters." I do not know what followed. But I do know that when the inspector and Herbert arrived, they found Daniels stretched out on the floor of an upper room, and that there were some words between Sullivan and Herbert that, as the inspector said later, fairly blistered the paint. In the end, they called an ambulance and took the unconscious man to the hospital on Liberty Avenue, and both Herbert and Sullivan sat with him the rest of the night. He was not hurt, it developed. He had collapsed from a combination of fright, hunger and thirst. But if they hoped that when he came to he would remember his identity, they were disappointed. He refused born food and drink, and could be induced only with difficulty to speak at all. Sullivan thought he was still shammering, Herbert has said since, but I didn't believe it. It was either genuine amnesia or straight hysteria. I'd seen both in the war, from shock. I thought the poor devil had had a shock. That's all. They tried to rouse him by questioning him. "Listen, now. Your name is Daniels, isn't it?" "Robert Daniels." "Daniels?" he said after an interval. "No. I'm sorry, but that's not it." He did not reply at all when Herbert suggested that he was John Talbot, and shortly after that he lapsed into what Dr. Armstrong calls a definite catatonia. He would or could not reply to any questions at all, was stiff and rigid in his bed, and could not be roused for the nourishment he evidently needed.